404-436-1277, 404-436-1277, the Raw Law Project. For those of you who are new to the Raw Law Project, let me help you get some ground rules here. My name is Mohammed Bashir. I'm a retired/suspended attorney, but that doesn't stop me from loving the people and loving justice. And so I'm here trying to educate, trying to make sure that people understand what it is that they go through when they enter into the criminal justice system. If you don't know, you shouldn't ask. And somebody asks, and so that's what I'm here for. I'm here to tell you exactly how it is. There are no cut cards here, and there are no apologies for what I have to say. I'm not offering you perfection. I'm just offering you real life experiences that you can take to the bank or you can leave it off to the side. When last we met, first of all, thank you all for tuning in the last time. My email and my phone and my Facebook page are lit up with questions now, and people asking, wondering where you've been and can you come represent this? I don't represent people anymore. I can't represent people anymore. Let's put it that way. And I love it that way because, again, sometimes you think you stop something and all you did was unleash a dragon, and that's what I think they did, was unleash a dragon. It gives me an opportunity to do what I really want to do, which is try to impact on our community on a broader base than on an individual case-by-case basis. So welcome for all of you out there. Welcome to the show. For all of my Muslim family and friends and brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's get it on. It's class time. I'm sure everybody has their pencil and their paper. I got mine. Here's my pencil. All right, I'm sure all you got your, everybody with their pencil, raise their hand. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. All right, you're going to be taking notes. When last we met, I wasn't out of the studio 10 minutes before I got a call saying, I'm not sure I understand perception, what you're talking about as it relates to perception. I spent, 15 minutes on the phone with the young man who called, African-American young man from Florida. And we had a great conversation. And I don't want to leave anything unclear. That's why it's called the Raw Law Project, because I don't want to leave anything unclear. And so if I have to get raw with it in order for you to understand it, that's what I'm going to do. The other day, I explained to you how it is that you are perceived in the criminal justice system. From the very moment that you walk out into the street, from the very first encounter, there's a perception that existed before you had that encounter. And I hope you understood that. So I'm going to try to help you get a broader picture of it, because there's a what's the word I'm looking for? There's like a atmosphere out there now that after what we call, what some people, Malcolm would call them handkerchief heads. I won't. I'll blame it on Malcolm. Would call handkerchief heads, left the civil rights movement. They call that generation the Moses generation. And this now would make this generation of leadership and of people who are defining the terms for the Black community as the Joshua generation. But this generation really doesn't have a connection to the Black struggle the way it was struggled. And it's like they almost forgot the history. And so therefore, when I'm talking to you about criminal justice now, I'm talking to you about a system that has a historic underpinning. It has a historic background that if you forget the history, you're doomed to repeat it. And this is what you're seeing here in criminal justice. You're seeing us repeat cycles that we should have overcome, knocked out the box, eliminated a long time ago, especially the concept of perception. Can you imagine how Martin Luther King was perceived? You know, I start this program with Malcolm. I'll be pleased with him, and with Martin, because these guys were prophetic in their discussion of what it was to represent the Black community and what it was to represent the pursuit of justice. And so let's go just take a small snippet of time and just jettison back, because again, we're talking about perception. How do you think Martin Luther King Jr., the Reverend Doctor, was perceived in America? Well, it was a part of America that is angry, Southern, white, Democrats and Republicans who just white. They didn't Democrat or Republican. They just hated Martin Luther King. Why? Because he was stirring up the good Negroes. All right. I mean, what kind of perception, where would they get that perception from? What was it about him that would allow them to have that kind of perception of him, that he was overstepping his bounds, that he was a troublemaker, that he was creating chaos? What King brought to the table, I'm just dealing with King now. I'm not even dealing with Malcolm and Adam Clayton Powell and Fred Hampton and H. Rap Brown and Stokely and Fannie Lou Hamer and a host of others. But I'm just dealing with Martin because he's an icon that all of us can look at and understand the concept of perception. He's perceived a particular way by the culture. But see, he's not just perceived as Martin Luther King, as shaking up the system, as lawless, as a criminal, as a terrorist. He's not just perceived just by one community. He's perceived by his own community. There's a part of his community that loved him from top to bottom. And so that love was like, we'll follow you anyway. We'll walk through a wall for you. That's a perception that they have of him, that Martin could do no wrong. You couldn't say anything about Martin that was wrong. Then there's another community, another part of the black community that was like, this cat is an Uncle Tom. Now, we use the word Uncle Tom crazily because if you ever read the Uncle Tom's Cabin, Uncle Tom is the hero. He's not the bad guy. The bad guy is what's this guy's name? Whatever it was. But there was Uncle Tom was the hero. Is that it? Sambo. Yeah. All right. So he's the real handkerchief head. He's the real one that's selling black people out. Uncle Tom was the one who was the hero. But we flipped the script on it, so we'll use the term, the pejorative, as to how he was perceived. So he was perceived a certain way in almost every community that he traveled in. Let's jettison that now to today. And the way you are perceived the minute you walk out your door onto the street corner. See, because we don't get to the concept of blacks being inherently lawless without Richard Nixon saying that we're going to put law and order back on the agenda. Law and order was an attack on Martin Luther King. He was calling Martin Luther King lawless, and the things that Martin Luther King did were lawless. It was breaking the law, even though he was breaking down barriers that were laws that were put in place to keep black people in their place, in that second-class citizen, sometimes third-class, almost slavery condition. So the perception with law and order being the word phrase of the day is inherited by this generation of whites in America and some blacks in America from a generation of Richard Nixon's and Ronald Reagan's, which, by the way, transferred over to the Bill Clintons of the world. And unfortunately, in my humble opinion, some levels of the Barack Obamas and now the Donald Trumps, that we are a nation of laws. And so anybody who would proceed to begin to violate the law on any way, regardless of how righteous it is, or how improper the law is, regardless of how righteous their stance is, or how improper or illegal or racist in the undertones the law is, then that person is perceived a particular way. I'll give you some examples. Right now, you have terrorism as a code word. But can you imagine the people like Greenpeace, environmental activists, are considered to be terrorists because they try to stop people from busting seals in their head with baseball bats or from destroying the ecosystem. I mean, how are they being perceived? They're being perceived because someone else is defining that particular perception. As a young black male in America, as a young Latin male in America, as a young white male, what's going on is you are accepting definitions from other people as to who you are and who other people are and accepting them. So every time that particular young white male walks out into the street, you expect a particular attitude. You expect a particular privilege. You expect a particular way of thinking coming from that white male because you have learned that white privilege exists and this is the way they act or this is the way they are perceived in the world. But you know what? They benefit from it, and they would be stupid, frankly, to not accept it. I mean, why would the young boy who is rapes a girl behind accused of raping a girl, rapes a girl? I think he pled guilty or he was found guilty of raping a girl behind a dumpster in California, and he got probation. And I mean, Look, I know some cats who touched girls on their butt and they got jail, they got prison, and I'm not saying either one is good. I'm just saying that the perception is that he's white and then therefore he can be rehabilitated, and you're black and therefore you have to be controlled. You have to be punished. You have to be corralled. You have to be looked after. This is the perception. The problem is we don't understand that the perception exists. So we step out into the world and a cop walks up to them. The first thing we want to do is argue with a cop, not even understanding his perception of us. If you want to argue with the cop and that's you righteous in your argument, then yeah, go ahead, argue with the cop. That's not for me to decide how you should act. What I'm saying is he has a perception of you the minute he sees you on the street. He sees you as a menace. As I told you last week, he saw Mike Brown as a gorilla, as a beast. That's why Mike Brown is shot in the head. They see the black community as unworthy. They see the black community as undeserving. And we have to understand that, because when I step into the courtroom with you, I have to know that all of that is about to take place in here, even if you don't recognize it. Why do you think your lawyer tells you to put on a shirt with a button-down shirt with a collar or something like that when you walk into a courtroom? He's trying to minimize the concept of perception, how you're going to be perceived. You're saying you're from Bridgeport, Connecticut, and they tell you from PT Housing Project. You say you're from Newark, New Jersey, and you're from the Bradley Court Housing Projects. And you got it. Bradley Court has a swag. PT has a swag. Baltimore has a swag. That wherever you walk like you're from Baltimore. You act like you're from Baltimore. You talk like you're from Baltimore. But when you step into that courtroom, there are people who see that and they see it negatively. And that impacts on how you're perceived in a courtroom. So when you're studying the law, and when you're getting ready for your trial, you are getting ready from the very moment that you had that first encounter, whether it's with your neighbor or with whoever it is that potentially is going to charge you. So if it happens to be a police officer, that perception is going to permeate your case from top to bottom. How are you going to be perceived? Are you going to control the perception as best you can, or is someone else going to control the perception? And that therein is the issue. So let's take a little fact scenario. Get your pens out. Oh, by the way, the Raw Law Project is named after this. This is Raw Law, an urban guide to criminal justice. And this is like my book on the criminal justice system, but it's also like my brand. And I'm going to ride it into the ground until all of us get an understanding. When I finish with you, I hope, and again, right now, since this is a class, you're getting the syllabus, you're getting the introductory. I haven't gotten deep into the law. I'm going to stay on perception until I'm sure you have it, because if you don't have perception and you're the lawyer and you don't have a perception of what it is to represent a black kid, then that black kid is in trouble with you as his lawyer. And if you're the paralegal and you're investigating in the black community and you don't have a clue what it's like to talk to someone from Baltimore or from DC, from Southeast, and you talking like you from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and you talking to someone in Southeast, they talk a totally different language than you talk. Their body language is different. Their thought process is different. Doesn't mean one is better than the other. It's just that if you're going to try to understand the people, you better find where they are and what it is that they're about, so that you can empower them when they get into the courtroom. All right. So perception is important. Antoine, I'm gonna use Antoine because I use Antoine in the book. Antoine is a hustler, young hustler. He's standing on the corner. He's standing on the corner with 3 friends. It's about 8 o'clock in the evening, 7. Let's do 7, because 7, Antoine is about high school age. So let's do 7, because he's coming home from basketball practice and he stops and he talks to his boys. Let's assume he's a young hustler, but he's also a high school student. He's got his book bag, etc. Cops roll up. He's talking to 2 or 3 of his boys. Now, he hasn't had a chance to get his hands on anything, hasn't had a chance to touch anything, hasn't had a chance to really do anything other than give a couple of his boys a pound. They ask him, how you doing in basketball? You gonna score 20 for me tonight? He lying. He gonna say, yeah, but that's what they do. Cops roll up. The lights go on. Everybody starts walking away. Well, Antoine, he's from the neighborhood. So what does he do? He does the same thing everybody else does. When the police come around, you go on where you got to go. Cop sees Antoine. He's the only one with a book bag. What do you think they do? What do you think they're perceiving? He could have on a uniform. That uniform could say Brigham Young University. I'm saying Brigham Young because you can't get whiter than that as a university. I mean, you know, it could say whatever it wants to on that, but he sees Antoine, and Antoine has a bag, and it's what they consider to be, in the black community, a high narcotics neighborhood. Isn't it interesting that, you know, I could go up to University of Maryland right now and probably buy more drugs in University of Maryland than I could probably find out here in North Avenue over here in Baltimore, and Elizabeth Avenue or South Park Street in Elizabeth, New Jersey. But it's always the black community that's considered the high drug neighborhood. And you know, just as an anecdote, this opioid epidemic that everybody's now complaining about, you wonder where these white kids who are dropping dead, unfortunately, in Vermont and in Towson and all that are getting their drugs from, because for it to be, you know, such an epidemic, you know. So I would suggest to you that there's probably somebody in up at Yale or somebody at Towson University who's probably hustling some heroin over there too, you know. And he may just not always be the black kids, like the 4 or 5 that just went to trial where the cops just testified against them, the cops that was helping them hustle the drugs in the neighborhood. But so they see Antoine. What do you think they're perceiving? They're perceiving that Antoine, that bag must be where the stash is, because this is a neighborhood. Why is he out here in this neighborhood if he's not hustling? This is a hustle neighborhood. This is the way they perceive it. And you have to be ready for that particular perception. And now Antoine has a decision to make. While his boys walk off, see, Antoine doesn't know whether or not any of them are holding, whether they're holding a weapon, whether they're holding drugs, whether or not they got warrants. He doesn't know. But he knows that it's the cops. The rule is on the street, cops come to the right, you go to the left. So he starts walking off. The cop says, what? Yo, my man, let me talk to you for a minute. Here's your first question for the night. Cop walks up and he says, yo, my man, let me talk to you for a minute. Do you have to stop? Last week we talked about the concept of search and seizure. And again, we're staying with perception. If a cop says, may I talk to you, or request to talk to you, you have no obligation to stop. You can stop as a courtesy. There's no law that says that you have to stop. Cop says, stop, freeze, don't move. Totally different scenario. All right. Now, he says, stop. What does that do? Now you have gone from a stop, a request for a stop, which you can do on your own, or you can continue walking and say, no, that's all right, I don't feel like talking. He says, stop. Now you have what's commonly referred to as a detention. Detention is different because a detention says now you're under an order from an officer. He's demanding that you do something. When you submit to that authority of that officer, that's a detention. A detention is only supposed to come about when there's a reasonable suspicion, a reasonable and articulable suspicion that a crime is being committed, or that a crime is being committed. Now, what does that mean, though? Reasonable and articulable. Reasonable means that he really does have a reason. If he's telling you he has a hunch, he had a hunch. He's been in this neighborhood. He knows what this neighborhood is like. It's a high narcotics neighborhood. The kids walked away, but I just got a hunch. I think this kid got something in his bag. A hunch is not enough as a matter of law. But again, we're talking raw, because whether or not he has it as a matter of law is irrelevant when you get in a courtroom, because he's going to say, oh yeah, he had furtive movements, meaning that he looked nervous. He tried to adjust the bag over his shoulder. He'll give you all of that, all the drama, so that it looks like he knows what he's talking about. But that's why when you read the report, you're going to look for words like furtive movements. You're going to look like acting suspicious. Look for those words, because those are code words that a court is going to use to determine whether or not this officer had a right or a reason to stop you or to stop Antoine. So let's assume Antoine says, okay, he's ordered me to stop, boom, stop. Now he's detained. He can question, he can ask whatever he wants to, but you don't have to answer any questions if you don't want to. I mean, it's just that simple. First of all, you have a right to remain silent. You have the First Amendment that says you can talk or you cannot erase. You have the Fifth Amendment that says you're entitled to due process and you can't be a witness against your own self, meaning you should not incriminate yourself. You should keep your mouth shut. Whenever an officer doesn't have the courtesy to treat you with courtesy, you should always keep your mouth shut because it means his intentions are no good. And the officers out there, if you want people to cooperate, treat them with kindness, treat them with courtesy, treat them with respect. There's nothing more profound that I found in trying criminal cases is when a witness comes to the witness stand and they really respect the officer that was investigating the case. I mean, I literally have cross-examined witnesses who have said that they were more afraid of the cop than they were of what went on in the street, which completely blows the state's case out the water. They subpoenaed him 5 times. They brought him down 3 or 4 times. The night of the arrest, they grabbed him and took him to the precinct and kept him there for 5-6 hours, trying to get him to say it was JoJo when they said the guy was 6'5", and no, JoJo's only 5'9", you know, but you sure it wasn't that guy that was 5'9"? And they're telling him all the stuff that they're suggesting until they eventually say, yeah, it was a guy who was 5'9". But they get on the witness stand and say, well, look, man, these cops, man, they were scaring me half to death. Because they didn't respect the people. They didn't respect the community because, again, of the perception that they have. Even the perception they have of themselves, that they have power, that you have to succumb to whatever it is that they say. This is why they tell you, yo, stop, with that deep voice. That's supposed to be intimidating. It's supposed to be a force. It's supposed to be a command. So you stop because you recognize that now it's a command. Now the officer is a command. But he's supposed to, at that point, have an articulable and reasonable suspicion. When you read some of your writers, some of your newspapers, and then some of your articles, they'll say reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion is different than an articulable and reasonable suspicion. Articulable means he has to be able to tell you or tell a magistrate or tell a prosecutor or tell someone what it is that made his suspicions reasonable. The fact that you live in the black community in the hood don't make it reasonable. The fact that they consider it to be a high narcotics neighborhood doesn't make it reasonable. I once tried a case and I fought with the judge every step of the way to get statistics on how many arrests were made in that neighborhood that were actually arrests for narcotics. The neighborhood was known as a high crime neighborhood, but that's because it had 3 domestic violence cases when I finally got the discovery. 3 domestic violence cases. And so they labeled it a high narcotics neighborhood, a high crime neighborhood, and felt like they could come to court and say they had the reason to stop a kid in the neighborhood because it was a high crime neighborhood. They were trying to get that off on a search and seizure. But once we got the statistics from that neighborhood, we found that in that neighborhood for maybe over a year, there hadn't been any crime other than 3 domestic violence complaints. And 2 of them was from the same dude. One of them was from a dude complaining on this girl who had beat him up. You know, that was a good case too. In any event, those kind of statistics matter. So if you're the lawyer, you want to find out, you don't really want to accept anything coming from the state. So you want to challenge whether or not there's a high crime area. I mean, if you go to a town like Chicago right now, and they got 300, 400 murders right now. What do you get to say? That the whole neighborhood all of Chicago is a high crime neighborhood? I mean, if all the murders occurred in one area in Chicago, does that make it a high crime neighborhood? As opposed to the area where they don't police, and everybody's selling drugs, and everybody's hustling, and everybody's stealing the country blind through credit card fraud or anything like that. The only thing that makes it a high crime neighborhood is the fact that the police descend on a particular neighborhood harder. But again, they're following the directive of Richard Nixon. That's the 60s, 68, 60s, whatever. They're following the directive of Ronald Reagan. That's the 70s. Tough on crime. Because the perception hasn't changed. We haven't gained control over the perception yet. We thought we had it with King. We thought we had it it was on the way with Malcolm. We thought we had a sense of pride. We're going to change the way our behavior is and how we go into this community. How we're going to address the community. We thought we had it. But the generation that came after them, and after the Panthers were all assassinated and wiped out for that reason, by the way, to get rid of people who understood the necessity of changing the perception. The generation dropped the ball on trying to understand how it is that you rebuild a broken community. We got caught up in being American and forgot that there was a Black America out there. I remember back in 2004, President Obama wasn't president then. He was giving a national speech at the Democratic National Convention. He said, there is no white America, there is no Japanese America, there is no whatever America, there is no Black America, there's only the United States of America. And I kept saying to myself, that statement is really scary because everybody else perceives it as there being a Black America. They shape all these laws around Black America. The perception of Black America. You had, under Clinton, 100-to-1 disparity between powder cocaine and crack cocaine, which means you could be penalized that you needed 1 gram of crack cocaine was the equivalent of 100 grams of regular cocaine, when crack can't exist without cocaine. It shouldn't have been the other way around. What the difference was, white boys were selling cocaine, Black boys were selling crack. So the intent was to criminalize Black conduct and to make it harder for you to convict white boys. So that's when you began to come up with these mandatory minimums, because the perception was we need to corral this community. We need to teach this community law and order. Dr. King don't even know what he unleashed on the community. We talk about an Obama backlash. Bruh, this was about Black people standing up and straightening up their backs with Malcolm, straightening up their backs with the Nation of Islam, straightening up their backs with SNCC, straightening up their backs with a radical church, with King calling for a radical revolution of values. This is what this was about. We have to come to an understanding that these so-called continual backlashes are people who have tried to define us since they met us, that is the so-called Black man. They've been trying to define us, and we constantly keep resisting being defined. When we are at our best at resisting being defined, we are at our most powerful, our most frightening to the world. But as long as we go along to get along, we're just your ordinary average. That's Joe who worked at my job, but his son's just another nigga, for lack of a better way to put it. Lock that nigga up. All he is a threat. That's how you're perceived. Perception is in every aspect of criminal justice, and you have to understand it. So Antoine is perceived as the guy who's carrying. So even if they pull everybody else over up against the wall, well, first of all, if they do that often, they never tell you that they do it, at least not in the report. They'll say you acted suspicious, and then that caused them to move because now they feel a threat. Because under Terry versus Ohio, Supreme Court decision says that they can pat you down, but they can only pat you down for their safety if they perceive a threat. So these pat downs that you're getting on the street are illegal if they don't perceive a threat. So what do? They come up with furtive movements, tried to run, was too loud, started cursing, kept reaching in his pocket. I kept saying, let me see your hands. All that kind of foolishness. All of it is designed for what eventually became, and it was shown to you. It was shown to you in what was called racial profiling. The idea that you could walk up to a young Black or brown man in a community because of the issue of law and order, because of what they call community policing, and say, hey, let me see what you got in your pockets, and run their pockets and find a joint and lock them up with a misdemeanor ticket. But you're only supposed to be able to pat me down if you have a fear for your safety, if you believe I have a weapon, or if you believe I'm a danger to you or even to myself. But nothing like that has existed. So when they had 600,000 stop frisks in New York, and the ACLU sued the police department in New York, sued them to get injunctive relief, and the Judge Shineland up there looked at it and said, this is amazingly illegal. You understood that they were operating on a perception that they created. They built the straw man only to say they could knock it down. But the history tells you that that's what they do. That's what they do. This is how you are being perceived, because someone else is defining your narrative. We have to get back to the point of defining the narrative. And you, as on the street corner, if you're young and you're Black, or if you're that neighbor across the street looking out the window, you better be very aware that this is what they're doing with your child. This is what they're doing with your kids. And you're wondering why your kids are so angry. You're wondering why they're so upset. You're wondering why they just at some point get fed up enough to explode on your city. But this is what they're going through every day. and the generation of leadership that came behind the Kings and the Panthers and the whatever else that can do, the anti-war movement and all these organizations that came, AIM and the Puerto Rican nationalists that were fighting for a sense of let us tell you who we are. We're not going along with this perception. We're going to change America for the better. All those organizations are gone. We are now struggling to figure out who we are as a people and how we're going to define ourselves, or are we going to be defined by others? Poor Antoine. He doesn't even know. He doesn't even know that 4 months ago in Baltimore, a guy was arrested. They didn't find anything on him, but they arrested him, only to find the tape recording of the officer planting drugs on him. The one where they plant the drugs in a can. Then there's another one where they plant the drugs in a car. I mean, and then there's the guy in Chicago that I talked to you about last week. He just plant drugs whenever he wants to. There was it's over and over and over and over. You are being perceived a particular way because you don't have a fight until you begin to define yourself, and you define yourself on the street corner by the way you handle that situation, that very first situation. Because when I walk into a courtroom with you, I want to be able to say, Antoine is my man. If Antoine decides to go to trial, I want to be able to say, yo, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Antoine is my man. This is a good kid. This is a young Martin Luther King Jr. And look at how they're treating Antoine. I want to be able to match what I know about policing with what I know about Antoine, and have Antoine be able to at least balance it, if not be raised above it. I want to put a face on Antoine that no one can take off of Antoine. The very first trial I ever had was a cat named, I'm not going to call his whole name, I'm just going to call his name as Kev. I know he's listening because he texted me and said he was going to be listening tonight. Very first trial. The cop said he saw Kev from, he was up on a rail in Plainfield, New Jersey. He's up on the rails watching Kev as he was hustling. So then he eventually comes down, he busts Kev, and they arrest some kid a couple of blocks away, and that kid has cocaine on him. Kev don't have anything on him. He got some money. Kev was, yes, sir, officer. No, sir, officer. That's right, officer. Okay, I'm under arrest. Oh, no problem. I don't really know what's going on. Can you tell me what's going on? No, don't be smart. Don't. When we get to court, well, when I first meet Kev, I'm sitting there and I'm listening to Kev talk. And I said, Kev, you know what? There's a rule in defense work. You never put the defendant on the witness stand. I said, but Kev, I'm putting you on this witness stand. You tell these people what happened. So when I prepped this case, I prepped the case with, I'm going to put my defendant on the witness stand. So I had to literally, in my opening and in my examination, vouch for Kev. So when I'm questioning any officers in the scene, well, did you see this kid? How was he dressed? Did he run? Did he do any of the things? I mean, you saw suspicious behavior. Other guy, the person who you arrested with the drugs, did he give you a statement? No statement. Did you bring him back and have him identify the person who allegedly sold him these drugs? Well, no, we didn't think that was necessary because the officer said he saw it. Wait a minute. I mean, that would be your principal witness. He would be the one who actually took something. If it came from Kev, he would be able to say, that's the guy, right? Yeah, but they're afraid to do that. Well, obviously you're under arrest. I mean, he's under arrest. You can hide him. You can shelter him. He can point him out for you, right? All those kind of questions. Finally, when Kev took the witness stand, his demeanor was exactly as the police had described, which is what made him a winner. His demeanor was as the police described. Was he antagonistic? No, he wasn't. And the officer who arrested him was trying, dance with me. Well, that's because he knew we had him. Okay, so that means then that you found crack cocaine was selling for $10. Then that means you found $10 on him, right? No, we didn't find it. We don't know what he did with the money. Oh, okay. And okay, what other indicia of hustling would you have seen? Was you didn't say your report doesn't indicate that he was looking around suspiciously or anything like that. So I have to assume that he wasn't looking around suspiciously, right? Because you would have reported that, being a seasoned pro like you are, right? question after question after question, and everything that they do were vouching for Kev. And Kev takes the witness stand and he says, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," as he's walking to the jury box to get up, or walking past the jury box to get in the witness chair. And the jurors smiled at him when he said, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen." And I knew we had him right then, because he was creating the perception as to who Kev was. Literally, when he was found not guilty, the judge said, "You can go." He had already released the jurors. There were 3 or 4 jurors outside waiting for him. I had argued that Kev was going to be a young Abe Lincoln. Said this kid is the kind of kid we want to see in our neighborhood. He probably was the one who was keeping more drugs off the street than anybody else who was putting on. His presence in that neighborhood probably kept more people from coming to this area, because they knew he wasn't down with the hustle. Kev is now a nice businessman, got two or three sons that are blue chip, all-American ball players, etc. And he's killing the game. He put that thing behind him, but not one day, from the very first day that I met him, he knew who he was and how he was going to be perceived in that courtroom, but he never deterred from being the person that he was and how he wanted to be perceived. Maybe he was a hustler, but maybe he was smart enough to know that perception carries the day in a courtroom. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. The call number here is 404-436-1277. I'm already looking at my phone. Let's go take a little break, and I'll come back and we'll talk about perception in a courtroom.